The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by ㅤㅤㅤㅤ. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 33. Flora, Part 2. The sound of the bamboo pole striking the ground was suddenly close, suddenly far, suddenly muffled, suddenly clear. This made it impossible to tell where it was coming from, and even more impossible to tell what was making the bizarre and sudden noise. "Everyone, come closer. Don't move around and don't draw your swords," Wei Wuxian said. If the juniors were to draw their swords in the middle of the blinding fog, instead of striking enemies, they might accidentally injure friends in the disarray. After a moment, the sound suddenly stopped. After a long silence, a disciple spoke in a low voice. "It's that thing again. Exactly how long is it going to follow us?" "It's been following you this entire time?" Wei Wuxian asked. "After we entered the city, we were afraid of losing each other because of the fog, so we gathered closely together and then we suddenly heard that noise. At the time, it wasn't so fast. The taps came one at a time, very slowly. We even saw a small, short, hazy silhouette walk slowly past us. But when we chased after it, it disappeared. The sound's been following us ever since." "How small?" Wei Wuxian asked. Lan Wangji drew a line around the pit of his stomach. "Very short, very small and thin." "How long have you been in the city?" "Almost 15 minutes. Sidgway replied. 15 minutes? Wei Wuxian asked. "Han Guangjun, how long have we been here?" Lan Wangji's voice came from somewhere within the blinding fog. "Around 30 minutes. "See? We've been here longer than you, so how did you guys get ahead of us? You only ran into us after you turned around." Jinling couldn't help but blurt out. "But we didn't turn around. We've been moving forward, following the road the whole time." If everyone had been walking straight ahead, then could someone have done something to the road and turned it into a circular maze illusion? "Have you tried mounting your sword and flying up to take a look?" Wei Wuxian asked. "I did," Lan Wangji said. "It felt like I flew very high, but in reality I didn't get far at all. Plus, there were some blurry black shadows circling in midair. I did not know what they were, but I was concerned that I was not able to handle them, so I came back down." Hearing this, everyone fell silent. The Shudong area was foggy to begin with, so at the outset they hadn't paid it much mind. But now it seemed that the fog was probably not natural, but rather some kind of enchantment. "This fog couldn't be poisonous, could it?" Lan Jingyi exclaimed in alarm. "It shouldn't be," Wei Wuxian replied. "We've already been here this long and we're still alive." "If I had known earlier, I would have brought Xianzi," Jinling said. "It's all your damn donkey's fault." Upon hearing the dog's name, Wei Wuxian felt the skin on his back turn to goose flesh. "We haven't started blaming your dog," Lan Jingyi retorted. "It bit first. Whose fault is it that little apple kicked it head on? Now neither of them can move." "What?" Wei Wuxian said. "My little apple was bitten by a dog?" "How could your donkey compare to my spirit dog?" Jinling said. "Xianzi was given to me by my younger uncle. If something happens to it, even 10,000 donkeys wouldn't make up for it." "Stop using Liang Fangzun against people!" Wei Wuxian babbled wildly. "Han Guangjun gave Little Apple to me to serve as my mount. How could you bring him down the mountain to night hunt with you? Are you trying to get him injured?" "You liar!" the Lan Juniors said in unison, refusing to believe that someone with Han Guangjun's superior taste would give someone a donkey as a mount. Even though Han Guangjun did not contradict Wei Wuxian, they were still determined to disbelieve him. "Sorry, young Master Mo," Lan Wangji said. "Your little apple Your donkey made a racket every day at the cloud recesses, and all of the seniors had been complaining about it for a long time. They ordered us to take it with us when we went out to night hunt and shoo it away, so we... Jinling also greeted the idea that Lan Wangji had given Wei Wuxian the donkey with disbelief. I hate even seeing that donkey, and you go around calling it some little apple. How moronic! It occurred to Lan Jingyi that if Han Guangjun had given the donkey as a gift, they were in trouble. He hastily said a few words in the donkey's favor. What's wrong with Little Apple? It likes to eat apples, so it's called Little Apple. How down to earth. The name is 100 times better than your pudgy dog Xianzi. How is Xianzi pudgy? Go, try to find me a spirit dog in better shape. Suddenly, there was silence. After a while, Wei Wuxian asked, Is everyone still here? A peal of sounded nearby, indicating all were present. Too much noise, Lan Wangji said coolly. Surprisingly, he had silenced everyone at once. Wei Wuxian couldn't help but rub his lip and consider himself lucky. Just then, the sound of footsteps came from the fog ahead, toward his left. The footsteps sounded slow and stumbling. Identical noises started to emanate from ahead toward his right, from either side of him and from behind him. Though the fog was too thick to see even a clear silhouette, a rotten, fishy smell was already wafting toward him. Of course, a few walking corpses would never be a cause for concern for Wei Wuxian. He softly whistled a rising note, ordering them to disperse. After hearing it, the walking corpses indeed paused briefly. But who could have guessed that, a moment later, they would charge? Wei Wuxian was mystified. His order had not only failed, but provoked them instead. There was no way he could have mixed up the order to go away and the order to attack. But there was no time to ponder this at present. 7 or 8 clumsy, crooked, human-shaped figures appeared amidst the fog. If it was possible to see their shadows despite the thickness of Yi City's fog, they must already be extremely close. Beechen's ice-blue sword light pierced through the mist and circled around the group. The sword drew a clear loop in midair, severing each and every corpse at the waist before returning to its sheath. Wei Wuxian let out a sigh of relief. Why? Lan Wangji asked quietly. Wei Wuxian was contemplating the same question. Why wasn't my whistle able to drive off the corpses? They walked slowly and smelled rotten, so they couldn't have been high-level fierce corpses. I should be able to scare them off by just clapping my hands. My whistle commands couldn't have suddenly stopped working either. It's not as though their power relies on spiritual energy. I've never encountered this kind of... A thought tore violently into his consciousness, and a trickle of cold sweat ran down his back. That was wrong. The idea that he had never encountered this kind of situation before was completely wrong. In reality, it had happened, and not just once. There absolutely was a kind of fierce, malevolent spirit or corpse he couldn't control. Spirits and corpses that were already under the control of the Yin Tiger Tally. Lan Wangji undid the silencing spell, allowing Lan Sijue to speak again. Han Guangjun, this situation is very dangerous, right? Should we exit the city at once? But the fog is so thick. We can't make our way through it, or fly out of it. I think there are walking corpses coming this way, a disciple said. Where? But I didn't hear any footsteps. I thought I heard strange breathing. The youth only realized how ridiculous his words sounded after he had said it. Embarrassed, he shut his mouth, while another youth said, Amazing. The sound of breathing. Walking corpses are dead. How could they breathe? Before he finished speaking, another sturdy, heavy-set figure came crashing toward them. Beechen left its sheath again, and the figure's head flew off its body, creating a strange splashing sound. The juniors nearby shouted, startled. What's wrong? Wei Wuxian asked hastily, afraid they had been injured. "Something spurted out of that corpse," Lan Jingyi said. "I think it was some kind of powder. It tastes bitter, sweet, and fishy." Unfortunately for him, as he had opened his mouth to speak, a great deal of powder had been sprayed into his mouth. Unable to stand it, he tried to spit it out several times. The substance that the walking corpse had spewed was no trifling matter. The powder was still in the air and still could wreak havoc. If someone got recklessly close to it and breathed it into their lungs, the problem would get even worse. "Get away from there! Come quickly, let me take a look," Wei Wuxian said. "Oh, but I can't see you. Where are you?" Lan Jingyi replied. The fact that they couldn't even see their fingers when they extended their hands made it difficult to move forward. It occurred to Wei Wuxian that every time Bichen left its sheath, its sword light penetrated the fog. He turned to Lan Wangji, who was beside him, and asked, "Han Guangjun, pull out your sword so they can walk to us." Despite standing right next to Wei Wuxian, Lan Wangji did not reply nor move. Suddenly, 7 or so steps away, a clear, blue light shone. Lan Wangji was over there? Then who was the silent person standing to his left? Abruptly, darkness flashed before Wei Wuxian's eyes, and a black face loomed before him. The face was black because it was obscured by a thick, black fog. The fog-faced man reached out and grabbed at the qiankun pouch hanging at Wei Wuxian's waist. However, as soon as his fingers wrapped around it, it abruptly began to expand. The knots holding it shut broke, and 3 malicious spirits, jumbled together and roiling with resentment, burst out and struck at his face. "You want the qiankun pouch?" Wei Wuxian said, laughing. "Your eyesight's bad. Why are you grabbing my spirit-locking purse?" Since the incident in the Yueyang Chang clan graveyard when they had snatched the newly unearthed torso from the gravedigger and forced him to leave frustrated, Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji had been vigilant. They had guessed that the gravedigger would refuse to give up. He would wait for the opportunity to strike and could appear at any moment to steal the torso and the other parts back. As expected, after the pair entered Yi City, the gravedigger took advantage of the fog and the group's confusion to show his hand. And indeed, the gravedigger had managed to get his fingers on a pouch. Only Wei Wuxian had long since swapped the qiankun pouch containing the left hand with the spirit-locking purse. With a clang, the opponent jumped backwards and drew his sword. Soon, the evil spirits shrieked as though they had been hacked apart by the blade. Sure enough, his cultivation level is high, Wei Wuxian thought. A moment later he shouted, "Han Guangjun, the gravedigger's here!" Lan Wangji needed no reminder. He knew something had happened immediately upon hearing the noise. He didn't reply and let the swift, savage swing of his sword answer in his stead. The present circumstances were not auspicious. The gravedigger's sword was covered in a black fog which concealed its sword light, allowing the surrounding white fog to conceal its movements. Meanwhile, Lan Wangji could not block out Bichen's light. He was visible, but the enemy was in shadow. Moreover, the gravedigger's cultivation level was far from low, and he was familiar with the sword style of the Guosulan clan. On top of all that, though they were both blinded by the fog, the gravedigger was free to strike at random, without concern for his surroundings, but Lan Wangji had to be careful not to accidentally injure any of his allies. The situation was entirely disadvantageous. Hearing several clashes of blades, Wei Wuxian's heart leapt. "Lanjan, are you hurt?" he blurted out. Someone let out a soft grunt in the distance, as though they had been critically injured, but the sound was clearly not made by Lan Wangji. "How could I be?" he said. "True," Wei Wuxian replied, smiling. The injured party seemed to let out a cold laugh, then resumed attacking. The sound of beachins and the opponent's sword lights clashing grew further and further away. Wei Wuxian knew that Lan Wangji didn't want to injure them by accident and was intentionally drawing the gravedigger far from the group. Naturally, the rest was up to him. He turned. "How are the people who breathe in the powder doing?" "They almost can't stand up," Lan Wangji replied. "Gather in the middle and report your numbers," Wei Wuxian said. Fortunately, after they had dealt with the wave of walking corpses and led the gravedigger away, nothing else appeared to harass them. The sound of the bamboo pole knocking against the ground also did not reappear to disturb them. The remaining disciples gathered around, counted themselves off, and Wei Wuxian discovered none were missing. He took Lan Jingyi and felt his forehead, a little feverish. After doing the same to the other youths who had inhaled the powder spewed by the walking corpses, he found that they were in a similar condition. Lifting Lan Jingyi's eyelids, he said, "Stick out your tongue out so I can take a look." Lan Jingyi said. "Congratulations, you have been poisoned," Wei Wuxian said. "What about that is there to congratulate?" Jinling said. "It's a type of life experience. Once you're old, it'll be a good topic of conversation." Typically, it was the bites and scratches of transformed corpses that poisoned people, or having a wound come in contact with their necrotic blood. But cultivators very rarely let walking corpses get near enough to bite or scratch them, so no one carried the antidote around with them. Deeply worried, Lan Wangji said, "Young Master Mo, will something happen to them?" "Not right now," Wei Wuxian replied. "But once the poison enters their bloodstream and gets into their heart, there's no saving them." Then what? "What happened to the corpses will happen to you. If you're lucky, you'll rot. If you're not, you'll become a jiangshi and will only be able to hop around from here on out." Each of the poisoned disciples gasped. "Do you want to be cured?" Wei Wuxian asked. All of them nodded their heads vigorously. "If you want to be cured, listen closely. From now on, you're all going to be obedient and listen to what I say. Each and every one of you has to listen," Wei Wuxian said. Though many of the youths weren't familiar with him, they saw that Han Wangjun treated him as an equal, and moreover was close to him, to the point that Wei Wuxian could directly call him by his given name. On top of that, they were in the middle of a cursed fog, in the ghostly, eerie East City, had been poisoned, and now had a fever. Anxious and frightened, they instinctively looked for someone to rely on, and Wei Wuxian spoke with a kind of unworried, ineffable self-confidence. They couldn't help but be led by the nose by him. "Yes," they replied in unison. Wei Wuxian wasn't satisfied. "Whatever I want you to do, you'll do. No disobedience, understand?" "Understood!" He clapped his hands. "Everyone get up. Those who weren't poisoned, carry those who were, ideally on your shoulder. If you're holding them up, remember to keep their head and heart above the rest of the body." "I can walk. Why do I need to be carried?" Lan Jingyi said. "Because, dear brother, if you run around everywhere, your blood will circulate very quickly. The poison will also reach your heart very quickly, so you have to move less. Preferably, not at all." The poisoned youths immediately stood as stiff as boards, allowing their companions to lift them. One youth, who was being hauled on his fellow disciple's back, grumbled. "That walking corpse that sprayed the poison really could breathe." "He already told you, if it could breathe, it would be alive," the one who bore him complained, panting. "Young Master Mo, we're carrying all of them. Where do we go?" The most obedient and well-behaved of the youths was Lan Wangji, who caused Wei Wuxian the least worry. "We certainly won't be able to exit the city for now. Go knock on some doors." "Knock on what doors?" Jinling asked. Wei Wuxian thought for a bit. "Does something other than buildings have doors?" "You want us to go inside?" Jinling replied. "There's already danger all around us out here. Who knows what's hiding indoors, lying and waiting for us? When he said these words, the juniors immediately felt that there truly were many eyes hidden in the thick fog and inside the buildings, closely watching their every word and action. They shivered involuntarily, their hair standing on end. Yes, it's hard to say whether staying outside is more dangerous than going inside, but since it's already this bad out here, even if the inside is worse, it can't be that much worse. Let's go, we shouldn't tarry. We have poisonings to cure. Everyone could only act according to his word. They formed a line and held on to the scabbard of the person in front of them in order to avoid getting lost. They went from house to house, knocking on doors. Jinling pounded on one of the doors for what seemed like half a day. Hearing no reply from inside, he said, "It doesn't seem like there's anyone in this house. Let's go in." Wei Wuxian's voice floated over from the distance. "Who told you we're trying to enter an empty house? Keep knocking. We want to go inside a house with inhabitants." "You want to find a house with people?" Jinling asked. "Correct. Do a better job knocking. You were doing it too hard just now. That's very rude." Jinling was so infuriated he was on the precipice of kicking the door down. In the end, he violently stamped his feet. All along the road, every house's door was shut tight. No matter how they knocked, the doors remained as motionless as the mountains. The more Jinling knocked, the more agitated he became, but he nonetheless used less force than he had previously. Lan Wangji, on the other hand, was calm and even-tempered the entire time. "Excuse me, is anyone inside?" he repeated for the upteenth time at the 13th house. Suddenly, the door moved. A slim black crack opened behind it. It was very dark behind the entrance, and it was impossible to see what was behind the crack. Moreover, the person who opened the door did not utter a single word. The nearby juniors couldn't help but back away slightly. Lan Wangji calmed himself. "Is this the store proprietor?" After a long, long while, a strange, aged voice seeped out through the crack. "Yes." Wei Wuxian walked over and clapped Lan Wangji on the shoulder and indicated he should take a step back. "Ma'am, this is our first time in this area. The fog is too thick and we've gotten lost. We've walked for a long time and are tired. Please, may we intrude upon your hospitality and take a moment to rest our legs inside your store?" The strange aged voice said, "My shop is not suited for resting." As though he had no inkling that anything was off, Wei Wuxian maintained a normal expression. "Unfortunately, no other stores in the area have any occupants. Are you truly unwilling to do us this favor? We will repay you generously." Not able to hold his tongue, Jinling said, "Where are you going to get the money? Answer that first. I'm definitely not lending you any." Wei Wuxian dangled a delicately crafted money pouch in front of his eyes. "Look, what's this?" "You have some nerve," Lan Wangji said, startled. "That's Lan Wangji's." As they were arguing, the crack behind the door widened. Though it was still impossible to see the furniture, they could now clearly see an old woman standing on the opposite side. Her hair was entirely ash white, and her face was expressionless. Though the woman was hunched over and appeared to be extremely old at first glance, she had relatively few wrinkles and age spots. It was thus still appropriate to refer to her as aunt. She opened the door and stood to the side, apparently willing to allow them entry. "She's really gonna let us go inside?" Jinling whispered in surprise. Wei Wuxian replied in a whisper too. "Of course. I put my foot in the gap behind the door. Even if she wants us to close it, she can't. If she had still refused to let us in, I would have directly kicked down the door." Even on its own, E-City was thick with aberrant energy, and thus its residents could hardly be ordinary people. The old woman's bearing, already so suspicious, made the disciples have second thoughts throughout the entirety of the exchange. Though they would have given anything to avoid entering, there was no other path they could take. The situation was desperate. They could only carry inside their poisoned companions, who were stiff and afraid to move. The old woman stood to the side and watched them with an indifferent eye. Once everyone had passed through, she immediately closed the door. Immediately, the room was once more drowned in pitch-black darkness. "Ma'am, why do you not light a light?" Wei Wuxian asked.
"The light is on the table. Light it yourself," she replied.
Lan Wangji was coincidentally standing next to said table. He slowly felt around in the darkness until he found an oil lamp. By then, his hands were covered in many years' worth of dust. He reached for a fire talisman and lit it, but just as he was about to bring it near the wick, he involuntarily looked up and glanced around the room. In the blink of an eye, a chill ran from his head to his feet, leaving his scalp numb. The store's main room was packed with people standing shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot, staring at them with wide, unblinking eyes.